August 636 D. Somewhere in the Syrian desert, 200,000 Roman soldiers, the full military might of the Eastern Roman Empire, stand in battle formation at dawn. Across from them, a ragged Muslim army less than a quarter their size stares back. By the time this is over, 6 days later, one of history's greatest empires will be broken beyond repair. Not by a gradual decline, not by political rot, but by 6 brutal, blood-soaked days on a plain surrounded by ravines, where the fate of the entire civilized world was settled by sheer human will. This is the Battle of Yarmouk. To understand why this battle mattered so much, you have to understand what the Romans had to lose. Emperor Heraclius had just finished the fight of his life, a decade-long war against Persia that had pushed the empire to near total collapse. He'd survived it. He'd won. And now, just years later, these Arab armies were sweeping out of the desert and taking everything he'd bled for. Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, city after city falling like dominoes. Yarmouk was his response, his answer. He stripped every available garrison, called in every favor, and assembled the largest force the Eastern Roman Empire could still field. This wasn't a counterattack. This was an ultimatum. Win here, or lose everything. The battlefield itself seemed designed to punish the loser. The plain was boxed in on multiple sides by deep ravines, the Wadi al-Rakad cutting across one flank, brutal terrain everywhere else. If an army broke and ran, it had nowhere to go. Heraclius's generals arranged their troops across a massive front, 4 separate armies, tens of thousands deep, with Christian Arab skirmishers under a commander named Jabla screening the front. On the Roman right, a commander named Gregory positioned his men with oaths to die before retreating. These men were not planning to lose. On the other side of that open mile of silence, the Muslim commander Abu Ubaidah surveyed his options and quietly handed battlefield command to the man history would call the Sword of Allah. Khalid ibn al-Walid, a general of almost supernatural tactical genius. Khalid had never lost a battle in his life, and looking at the odds stacked against him, he was about to earn that reputation all over again. He immediately tore apart the existing formation and rebuilt it from scratch. Compact tribal regiments built on clan loyalty, where every man knew the men beside him. He fused all available cavalry into one elite strike force of 5,000 horsemen. Mobile, centralized, devastating. Behind the fighting line, he positioned something no general of the ancient world had ever quite weaponized so deliberately. The women and children of the army. Abu Ubaidah's orders to them were blunt. If the men retreat, stop them, by any means necessary. The morning of day 1 began with a scene almost surreal in its drama. A Roman officer named George rode out alone and asked to speak with Khalid directly. The exchange that followed was calm, almost philosophical. George asking about the title Sword of Allah, asking what Islam truly demanded of him. Khalid answered plainly, conversion, or tribute, or war. And then, in front of both armies, George accepted Islam. He crossed the lines. He fought for the Muslims that day, and he died before sunset. Whatever you make of that story, both armies witnessed it, and the psychological electricity it sent through the Muslim ranks was real. Then the duels began. Champion after champion rode out, and Muslim officers dominated the exchange so thoroughly that Roman command recognized the morale battle was slipping. They ordered a mass infantry assault. Day 1 went to the Muslims. Barely. Roman infantry was powerful, disciplined, and numerous, but the Muslim three-rank line absorbed it. Yemeni archers carved into the advancing formations. When the sun went down, no Roman had broken through. In the Roman camp that night, humiliation curdled into rage. Vahan, the Roman supreme commander, scrapped his cautious approach. The plan for day 2 was a hammer blow to both flanks simultaneously, launched before sunrise while the Muslims were still at prayer. It almost worked. Roman forces hit both wings of the Muslim army in the pre-dawn darkness, and the result was near catastrophe. The right flank under armor buckled. The left flank under Yazid gave way. The Muslim center held, but the battle lines bent inward like a horseshoe, and retreating men streamed backward toward camp expecting safety. What they found instead was something they feared more than Roman spears. The women were waiting, armed with stones, tent poles, and fury. They blocked every path of retreat. Hind bint Utbah is said to have shamed the men with words so cutting they turned men around through sheer pride alone. The retreat stopped. The men turned back, and Khalid, who had been watching the entire collapse with cold calculation, released his cavalry reserve at exactly the right moment, hammering the Roman flank as the infantry surged back from the front. By nightfall, lost ground had been reclaimed. Day 2 survived. Day 3 brought the concentrated hammer blow. The Romans stopped spreading their effort and aimed everything at the Muslim right. Slavic and Armenian heavy infantry, some of the best fighters in the known world, ground down Amar's sector with fresh rotations, cycling exhausted soldiers out and throwing fresh ones in. The Muslim right collapsed again. Again the women stopped the retreat. Again Khalid improvised a brutal counterattack. By dusk the Romans were back where they started, but the Muslim army had paid for it in blood and bone. And the day that followed, day 4, would later be remembered by a name that told you everything: the Day of Lost Eyes. The Roman pressure on the Muslim right opened the most dangerous breakthrough of the battle. Khalid feared full exploitation, a gap wide enough to pour through and end everything. He ordered a preemptive attack on the opposite end of the line to fix Roman forces there while he organized a cavalry strike against the penetration. It worked, but at hideous cost. Roman archers on the left destroyed the advancing Muslim troops in concentrated volleys, and hundreds of men were blinded. Abu Sufyan himself lost an eye in those volleys, and still the line had to hold. Then Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl did something that belongs in the annals of military history. With 400 men, he made an oath. They would not retreat. They would not yield. They would stand and die where they stood. And they did exactly that, their suicidal resistance clogging the Roman momentum just long enough for the rest of the line to stabilize. By the time Khalid reached him, Ikrimah was dying from his wounds. He died that night in Khalid's presence. Some men's deaths matter. His mattered. By day 5, both armies were shadows of what they had been. Men who had fought 4 consecutive days in 100-degree heat, with wounds wrapped in strips of cloth, eating whatever remained. When the 2 battered armies formed up that morning, the Romans did something unexpected. They didn't attack. Instead, Vahan sent an envoy proposing a truce and renewed negotiations. Abu Ubaidah, looking at his wounded, was inclined to listen. Khalid was not. He recognized the offer for what it was. Not diplomacy, but desperation. The Romans were offering to talk because they no longer believed they could win. Khalid's reply was simple and final. The offer was rejected. The battle would be decided here. On this ground, tomorrow. The fifth day passed in silence while Khalid planned. He did something almost unthinkable. He stripped every cavalry unit from every corps and fused them into one enormous central strike force. The Wadi al-Rakad ravine sat behind the Roman left. That ravine was going to be the anvil. Khalid's cavalry was going to be the hammer. If this worked, it wouldn't just be a victory. It would be annihilation. Day 6 opened with something the Romans hadn't seen all week. A Muslim army on the offensive. Before the Romans could decide what to do with it, a Roman general named Gregory rode out to solve the problem the old way. Kill the enemy commander in single combat. And Abu Ubaidah, to the alarm of everyone around him, insisted on answering personally. What followed was a tense individual duel in front of both armies. The exchange of blows, a feigned Roman withdrawal that looked like a trap, and Abu Ubaidah cutting through the feint and killing Gregory where he stood. The Roman army watched their general die, and whatever psychological reserves they had left began to crack. Khalid moved the moment he saw it. The entire Muslim line advanced, but not all the same way. The center and left pushed forward to pin the Roman formations in place, to nail them to the ground and take away their ability to maneuver. Khalid took the cavalry wide, swinging around the Roman left flank in a massive arc. Amar's infantry hit the Roman lines from the front. Khalid's horsemen hit them from the side. The Slavic formations shattered under the double pressure and careened into the Armenian units beside them. Roman cavalry on the left wing, suddenly unsupported and outflanked, broke and fled the field. And when cavalry abandons infantry on a battlefield, infantry dies. What followed was not a battle. It was a collapse. The Roman line fragmented into pockets, some fighting, some fleeing, many simply overwhelmed. The ravines that had made this plain a perfect killing ground now became a death trap for the retreating army. Entire units were forced into terrain from which there was no escape. The losses were catastrophic. The Roman army that walked into the Battle of Yarmouk did not walk out of it. Emperor Heraclius, waiting far to the north in Antioch, received the news of the defeat and reportedly looked back one last time towards Syria before turning away. The Arab sources preserve what he said: "Farewell, a long farewell to Syria." He never came back. Neither did Rome. Yarmouk did not just cost the empire a province. It cost the empire its future. Within 10 years, Egypt would be gone. Within 20, Persia would be gone. The world that had existed since Alexander the Great, the world of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, was shattered in 6 days on a plain in the Syrian desert by an army that should have had no business winning. History's hinge points rarely announce themselves. Yarmouk didn't either. It just happened. Brutal, relentless, and utterly decisive. And the world it left behind was a different world entirely.